this computer. Okay, so back to this. I'm going to go back to Allie's. We're just looking at creative motion here. So one of the things she ran into was she did some outside, and she had her dad come out and have these balls, which is great. This is like really good. Tossing, juggling. Her dad's juggling. And what was going on here though was obviously there's not a lot of motion stopped, right? It's they're stopped right in, there's the balls are stopped right in midair. And what was going on was her shutter speed was a 500th of a second. And this happens a lot. She's not the first person, nor is she going to be the last person that this happens to. The reason is she was using her light meter, which she should. She's doing it properly, looking at her light meter. She had her ISO at a decent, it's kind of high actually for being outside. It could have been 400 or 200, but needless to say, the thing was her aperture was really big at 4.5. So she was letting in a ton of light with her aperture, a ton of light with her aperture. So when she made her shutter speed long at like say a 30th or a 15th of a second, it was just all white. You wouldn't have seen anything because it would have been blown out white because her aperture was so big. So what she would have needed to have done, and she said she's going to go out and try it again, is make her aperture like f/22. And that's kind of that whole thing about balancing your shutter speed and your aperture, right? So that's a good learning process there on that. And what I wanted to show you really quickly on this is how that happened. So her aperture was like f4, which is gigantic, letting in a ton of light. And then she probably, Allie, you tried it with the long shutter speed outside, you said, right? And it was just like white, right?
Yeah, I think I did.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and even if she didn't, I'm sure she probably did. If she had it at f4, right, which is right here, and then she was like at a 30th of a second or a 15th of a second at ISO 800 outside, it's just going to be white. Everything. I mean, the whole screen is just going to be bright white. So, what she needs to do, or what she's going to do, is instead of being at a 500, right? So she was all the way here to 500, and she got a good exposure at a 500. The exposures of her dad are good. They're fine. So if she wanted a long shutter speed, she would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to like a 15th, 5 stops to a 15th, and that would get those balls blurry, like they would be blurry. And then if she went from, I counted 5. If she goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to f/22, which I don't have on here, but that's the next one f/22. So she goes f/22 at a 15th, and I just keeps her ISO the same. f/22 at a 15th, it'll show motion, and it will be a good exposure of the balls and her dad, and everything was pretty good. The background was a little bit bright, but that's okay. I mean, that's not a big deal. So that's just kind of I like to see that, really. Like I don't like to see that she didn't get it right, but I like to see that you're in the ballpark there. I know that she's looking at those numbers, and I know that like she's changing things and trying to figure it out. And that's a good part of the learning process there. And it's really what manual use is all about, is balancing those two and figuring out which one is better for which situation. And I said this to the first class, and I want to say it to you all. And like I said, I feel like you all are, there's Grady. You all are pretty solid fundamentally in camera skills. One of the things is, okay, so from the day one till now, all we've talked about is aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And that is the fundamental operation of the camera. And it's hugely, very, very, very important. I can't emphasize enough how important that is. But after a while, you understand that. You just start to get it. You get a feel for it. You'll memorize the apertures. You'll memorize the shutter speeds, especially if you do it a lot, right? So that becomes sort of just second nature. It's like riding a bike. Um, After that comes the photography part. It comes like what am I looking at and what am I looking for? And one of the things before we get into that, but that's what we're going to talk about today is light. Light, because light is by far, in my opinion, the number one most important thing in a photograph. I don't care if you had the most interesting scene that I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it could be like an elephant riding a bicycle or something, whatever. And I'm looking at it and the light and it's bad or it's underlit or it's just not lit well. It's gonna really take away from the importance of that photograph. So, but content does matter, and content would be the elephant on the bicycle. That's the content. Yes, that matters too. That's very, very, very important as well. But the light and how the light affects your subject is everything. It really is. And I didn't figure that out myself for years. Like I was always about what am I doing? I'm in a basement and I would paint myself all, weird colors and go into a basement and stick my hand in a furnace or something and make it look, like my arm was inside of a machine or whatever. I would try to think of things all the time. Um, but I never had good light. I'd have like one dangling light bulb and sometimes that would work, it almost looked like some kind of horror movie or something, with a dangling light bulb. I like dangling light bulbs. But a lot of times I didn't have good light because I would always just deal with like one light and wherever it was, there's where it was. And I would take my light meter reading and okay, there's my light. I didn't think about how it was affecting my subject that much. I took it for granted. Okay. And not to get too much into myself, but that's just how I started. And I really didn't start learning this until I started shooting weddings, first as an apprentice. And then as I started doing it professionally with this guy that I work with in Columbus, where it was a whole new world. And this guy started 13 years after I did. I've been photographing a long time before him. He was a banker, but he understood it. He researched it, he learned it, and he just kind of naturally, I think, understood it. And the more I worked with him and the more I saw, oh yeah, the side light, and it's at an angle, at a 45-degree angle, and it works on the subjects and makes the subject stand out and sculpts the subject. Then I really advanced. Like I got to a point where I could do, and now I'm talking in terms of portraiture a little bit here. And this assignment this week that I'm going to talk about is portrait lighting. And I'm more maybe a portrait photographer as a career than anything else. And that's just where I came from. I have done commercial work too. And even in commercial work, lighting is everything. I mean, if it's not lit well, your product's not lit well, it's not gonna look good on the website. So it all matters in all aspects of photography, but especially in portraiture in some ways because of the way it sculpts your image, your subject's face and their body and how they blend or how they sit with the background and everything else. So there's a lot to it and it really matters. And when I look at say other professional websites or whatever, it's the first thing I kind of look at. I mean, honestly, it's the first thing I'm looking for. What are they doing with the light? And a lot of people have a tendency to backlight a little too much because they want that, what they call it, kind of rim lighting behind the head. You've all seen this, right? They all look for that, and they should be looking for it. And I'll just show you really quickly here in portraiture, a lot of people are always kind of looking for, I mean, even in this, okay, this are just some photos of like, my wife at my mom's house, right? But even this is environmental lighting. Everybody wants this, right? This kind of magical, like kind of outline, right? Um, but and I get it here, and this is a student here, right? And in that, right, that magical kind of just lighting in the hair, it just really is it's a pretty thing for portraiture. I think it's kind of hard to argue against that. But what people do a lot of times that I've noticed is they've got that light not at a 45-degree angle behind the subject, but sort of too much of the light totally behind the subject, completely behind the subject. And when that happens, you start to get backlit photos, and that's not good either. So we're going to talk about lighting basically from here on out and some other things too, but lighting is going to be really our number one thing. Um, and for one, for starters, in the book, okay, if you have the book, chapter 8, pages 135 to 153 is all about lighting. And I have the book here. If you have the book, that's great because this book is actually pretty it's pretty good. I mean, it has a lot of good information in it. But like this photo right here, I like to show right at the beginning of the chapter. And it's a street photo. This is just street photography. Oh my, I locked up there. That's just street photography, okay? And you could say, if you ask somebody, what is this photo about? What is this photo about? You have these kind of, nice looking young ladies here walking down the street. Maybe they went shopping or whatever. They're kind of backlit. They're backlit and they're kind of shadows. Like if you look at their faces, they look like they're in shadows. But then you have this sort of like, I don't know, this guy over here, I think it is, struggling. He's in a wheelchair, his head's down. He's he's in the shadows a little bit over here. So I think there's something being said about this photograph, right? There's this dichotomy of, sort of happy and healthy and then not so happy and healthy. Okay. But overall, when you look at this photograph beyond the content of it, and there is content in this, and that's important, is the light, right? This is almost a photograph of light. It really is. If you look at it, and it's backlit, but it works really well. You have these leading lines and these beams and rays of light. And that really makes that photo grab you. And that's what you're going to see over and over and over again in photography. And sometimes it's just really diffused. Let's see, I can't see my screen here. Really diffused, soft light, like that lady in the hat, or this is more that one, the black and white's kind of hard light. I'm going to talk about all this here in a second. But sometimes it can be really diffused soft light coming through a curtain that's sort of a veneer, like a see-through curtain, and it kind of diffuses the light a little bit, and you get that soft light. But light is really the main thing. And the sooner, and I think a lot of you already understand this, right? And that's good. You're ahead of where I was when I was at Sinclair, if you are. It's super important. So the first thing is light. What is it and where does it come from? Okay. There's two sources of light, really. And again, I didn't write a book on photography. These are my opinions and me as a lecturer saying this. There's more than two sources of light, but and I put them in two categories, right? Natural light, which is the sun. That's it. Okay. Some people say, well, fire's natural light, but fire's sort of not really, doesn't put off a lot of light. You'd be surprised. A lot of people think it does. They'll take campfire photos, and the fire doesn't really put off a lot of light. So I say natural light, there's only one, the sun. And the sun is a very powerful natural light, the natural light. Okay. We don't have a lot of control over the sun, right? We have no control over the sun, really. I mean, depending on the weather, the sun is going to be the sun either way, but depending on our atmosphere, it can change. And a lot of times that's great, especially if it's a little bit cloudy. That's a really good time to photograph. But let me stay on task, on subject here. We have natural light and we have artificial light, right? Human created light, light bulbs, fire, even kind of, because you start the fire generally. But let's just stay within photographic standards here. Artificial light would be like flash, like studio lights, those kind of things, right? Even walking into a store or a light bulb, whatever, that's artificial light. So that being said, nowadays, from my experience, most photographers, they have flashes. They definitely use flash, and they a lot of times have reflectors, and we're going to talk about those. But most photographers that I see are natural light photographers. And that's good, in my opinion. Some people would say it's not. Some people would say it's like not as professional because they don't have a studio somewhere and they don't have thousands of dollars in lights. but I don't really agree with that. I think natural light photography is great. And one of the things I would tell you is like I graduated high school. I'm an old guy. I graduated in 1989. Okay. And back then, all the senior pictures were always studio, right? And we would go into this little studio and we put on the outfit, whatever it is we wanted to wear that day, and they'd have a block, and maybe a fake Greek column or something like that, and like 1989 in big letters somewhere in the background, and a muslin dropped, and then they'd have, two or three lights on me, and I'd be going, like that or whatever, and it was a different style back then. You don't see that as much. And I'm not saying it's a bad style. Like I didn't like 80s was 80s, but studio photography is still a thing. I mean, there are still people that do it and do it really well. It's changed a lot. The style of it has. It's not like as kind of kitschy as it used to be, but it's still a thing. But nowadays, what most kids want, or high school kids, is, hey, if it's a young man, you take him out to he's got his mom and dad bought him a Camaro or a pickup truck or something. He wants to stand in front of that, and it's outside or maybe in front of a barn. And I'm out in Jamestown, so all the kids out here are farmer type kids, so they all want that. They want outside by the barn or in the field or something like that. And that's cool. That's fine. That's what they want. They want their natural environment. And you get that more with, using natural light, like the sun. So you can go wherever you want. Like young ladies, a lot of times like to go to the green, or, go to like the sunflower fields out of Yellow Springs or something like that, or Cox Arboretum, somewhere where it's just pretty flowers and stuff. And that's cool. So I think you have a lot more versatility as a natural light photographer. And it's not like you can't do both. It's not like it's just one or the other, but I just think natural light is more of a common thing now. You have natural light and artificial light, but then in light, you also have, there's categories in these things. You also have different types of how the light affects the subject. And there's either diffused or there's direct, right? So direct light is like if you're on a summer day and there's no clouds in the sky and it's a blue sky, not a single cloud, and the sun is like noon, right in the middle of the sky, just beating down on everybody. And I know we've all experienced that. It's hot. It's like 90 degrees out. And that's direct light. I mean, that's the sun just giving everything it's got. And it's just caught. And you see the shadows that are cast on those types of days. And they're really hard shadows, right? They're very hard shadows. So that's one way, and that's not optimal generally for photographers. That's usually kind of not optimal because it's such a hard light, especially with the sun being right in the middle of the sky. Okay, that's not a good place, and I'm going to show why that's kind of suboptimal too here in a minute, and some of you probably know that as well. But let's say on a direct light that you're out there and the sun's a little bit lower in the sky. Let's say it's like 5 o'clock in the evening or something like that. So the sun's a little bit lower, but it's still really direct, bright light. You'll see a lot of times photographers will come out and they'll have an assistant with them. And I've got one somewhere, but what they'll have is a big reflector. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen those. Like it's just like a big reflector. It wraps up in a little circle and you can unwrap it and then hold it. And what a lot of times the assistant will do is get on the shadow side, because if you think about if the sun is really bright coming in this way, the other side of the person is really dark and in shadows. And that's a problem. That can be very problematic. That's very contrasty light. So what the assistant a lot of times will do is hold that reflector on the other side, on the shadow side, and kind of bounce the sunlight back into the subject to kind of fill those shadows in. That's why they do that. Okay, so there's ways to work around it. There's ways of sort of manipulating the sunlight like that. Or you can use a flash outdoors, especially if you have really bright light. And I think this is a good enough time to explain this as any. But if you have really bright light outdoors and you have a high sun, okay, I'm just going to turn my lights off and sort of show you this. we'll plug this in. All right, but it's a very problematic lighting situation, and I'll show you why. Because every human being has a brow, right? We all have this brow, even if yours isn't as pronounced as mine, we all have that. And when you have, I'm just going to turn the lights off in here. When you have that brow, and you gotta just, the only reason I'm turning the lights off is to really show the effect of this. When you have sun, I'm gonna take my glasses off here. When you have sun directly over someone like this, it creates that see those big deep dark shadows under my eyes. That is not flattering. I mean, and again, this is subjective. If you were doing maybe a picture of a vampire or something and you wanted them to look like that, maybe that's the lighting you want. But generally, that's not good lighting when the sun is directly above, right? So what do you do to counteract that if you have the sun directly above you like this and you're trying to take this picture and it's like this? Well, there's two things you can do. You can either move the person somewhere else where there's a little bit more shade. That's a good option. Or you can use a flash. And a lot of people don't think about that, but you can actually, when you're outside on a bright sunny day, if you've ever seen a photographer out there and gone, why are they using a flash? It's so bright out. They're using it to fill shadows in, because a flash on a camera will hit those shadows and kind of reduce the drastic nature of them by filling them in. So a lot of times flash is used to fill in shadows, okay? And we're not gonna really use flash. I know some of you are in the photo program, you will in like studio, but flash is used for that. So does anybody have any questions about that so far? These are just sort of different examples of lighting, okay? So all right, so in a studio, I talked about reflectors. Oh, let me talk about one more thing outdoors before we go to the studio, is that the better lighting situation outdoors, honestly, if you ask probably 99 out of 100 photographers, is a little bit of cloudy cover, like especially not real bright, puffy, singular clouds. But when you get, those are kind of bad because they block the sun. But when you get like a rain, but it's just a hazy, like sort of hazy cloud cover, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing for photography because it diffuses the light a little bit and it makes soft shadows and it just makes for really nice outdoor photos. But you can't control that. What you can do when you get into a studio is you can use diffusers, right? So what a diffuser will do is if you have this really harsh light, I don't know why that trips my camera up every time, but you have this really harsh light, there are things called diffusers that you can put over camera or over lights that actually diffuse the light and make it softer. And it's not going to be really easy to show in here. But what this does is they're generally white like this. It wouldn't be a piece of paper, but they're like a white sheet of like plastic that's see-through, and they cover the light and they kind of diffuse it. Okay. And it makes for like a less, yeah, you can see it there. It just makes for like a less drastic light, but it still gives you a lot of light at the same time. So that's one of the things they'll do is use diffusers, okay? And generally they're always on their light boxes, diffusers are. Rarely do you see straight light, okay? But it's good too. It can be, especially if you're doing something artistic. So let's talk about contrast on diffuse versus high contrast versus diffused, or direct versus diffused. Okay, direct, diffuse, or you could call it high contrast, low contrast. So if you're doing like say a corporate headshot or something like that, or like even like just a family photo or just a portrait of someone, they're not going to generally want really harsh light, like real dark on one side and real bright on the other. They're not going to want that. If you gave that to somebody like a CEO and said I did this, they'd be like, it's a little drastic. You kind of want diffused, even light generally for portraiture, but there's no like rules really in lighting. I mean, like the opposite of that would be, instead of me holding my light over my head like this, if I did like a really dramatic side light and I did something of like a musician or a poet or an artist or something like that, they probably would like that kind of lighting, right? So it kind of depends on your client. That might be cool. That might be good to have real dramatic black and white light on somebody, especially like, like I said, like a performer or somebody like that. Okay. So there's no real rule to it. It just kind of depends on your client. Um, so what we're talking about is portrait lighting for this next assignment, which is due not this Friday, but it'll be due on the 8th, March 8th. The one that's due this Friday, the 1st, is your depth of field assignment. And everybody's been caught up pretty well. So this Friday is depth of field. What's due next Friday, the 8th, is going to be this assignment, portrait lighting. And I want you to know right off the bat, this is only 4 photos, just like depth of field. Okay. It's another one that's only 4. So if you're a little bit behind, and I don't think anybody really is, if you're a little bit behind, it's a good time to catch up because it shouldn't take you that long. We're just doing 4 simple portrait lighting setups, very simple portrait lighting setups. Okay. And if you have access to come into Sinclair, I want to tell you this on Thursday at 2 o'clock, and a lot of you might not, but if you do, I'm going to have this in the room and I'm going to have a little stand that it sits on, and you could do this in the classroom, and I will be there, and I'm going to have students coming in and doing it if you think you need this, because if you don't have one of these, you can still do it. And students have been doing it for years now, but it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have something like this. But let me tell you what's in this. This is a 60-watt LED bulb. Okay. It's daylight. It puts out bright white light, which I like. I don't like the yellow light, but this is a 60-watt LED bulb, and it's pretty bright. If you have access, so you can go to Lowe's and buy those or whatever, Home Depot or Kroger or whatever. You buy a bulb. You don't have to have one of these. You could have just like a little lamp. You really could. And I think a lot of students just do that. What I like, if you're going to do it at home, and I'm going to show you examples, is I like a clean background, like a white background or just a clean painted wall with not a lot of clutter in the background. Make it look like a studio photo as much as you can. Okay. And I'm going to go through exactly how to do it. But the first thing is you definitely need something like a flashlight would kind of work, but I would highly suggest like a little bit of a little lamp or something like that. Okay. And you're going to have to move it. You're going to have to move it to see this one effect that I'm going to show you. And it's called Rembrandt lighting or high 45. It's pretty easy to get, but you have to move your light in just the right way to get it. Okay. So before I jump too far ahead into that, I'm going to literally demonstrate how to do it here. I want to look over my notes and make sure I'm good on this. Simple portrait lighting. Yeah. So one of the things, if you're outdoors, I want to say too, is like I briefly mentioned it, but if your sunlight is very bright, don't be afraid to go into the shade. Okay. And when I say shade, there's differences in shade too, which we're going to talk a lot more about in 2 weeks. But there's just pure shade, like under like a picnic area at a park. Say you go to a park and you got one of those like roof picnic areas. Shade in that is black, pure shade. That's not good shade to photograph in. The good shade is open shade. And if you give yourself some time, I'm going to talk about it a lot more in 2 weeks, but write down open shade. And if you have some extra time, look it up. Look up open shade on Google. Just Google open shade. Open shade is like the edge of shade. It's like sort of, you're not out of the shade, but you're not in direct sunlight either. And that's a really, really good place to photograph. And I can tell you on probably 80% of the photos on the company I worked for's website outdoors are in open shade. They're in some form of open shade generally. So look that up, but I'll get into more detail on that later. Let's get back to portraiture. One other thing I want to talk about with light is this is a very simple rule, but it's effective and it works really well, is that how on this, f2.8, the amount of light being let in here is exactly twice as much light as the amount of light being let in at f4. It's exactly twice the amount. From f4 to 5.6, f4 is twice the amount of light being let in as f5.6. Same with shutter speeds. 1/15 is twice the amount of light being let into your camera as a 1/30th. 1/30th is twice the amount of light as 1/60th. The reason I'm explaining this is because in the other way it's half, right? 30th to the 60th is half, right? Did I explain that correctly? Yeah, twice the amount of light is this way, right? So longer shutter speed is twice. I hope I didn't mess people up. Yeah, I said it right. 2.8 is twice the amount of light as f4. So the other way of explaining that is f4 is half the amount of light as 2.8, right? Hopefully that makes sense. I hope I didn't mess people up. 1/30th is half the amount of light as 1/15th, right? 1/25th is half the amount of light as 1/60th, and vice versa. Okay, simple concept. Twice in half, doubles in halves. The same thing is true of light. And I think this is why they do it this way, that this is why it's all in doubles and halves. And what I mean by this, and it might be a little hard to explain here, but I'm going to point the light at my guitar and I'm going to turn it on. Okay. And I'm right now, I'm at, yeah, right now, I'm about 6 feet away from my guitar. Okay. Now, whatever power this light is, I'm not measuring it with a light meter, but whatever power this light is, when I half the distance to my guitar, it doubles the power of the light. Just like in photography. This is a really good thing to know, just to put in your store away in your brain. Okay, so when I go from here, it's not changing, obviously, I'm not changing the power of the light, but me shining this on my guitar from 6 feet away, if I go to 3 feet away, I have doubled the amount of light on that guitar. Okay, that's just the nature of, that's the physics of light. When I go 6 feet away again, I've halved the amount of light on that guitar. And that's when you'll see in studios a lot of times, photographers, instead of changing the power of their light, which you can do with good photo lights, a lot of times what they'll do is just move it back a little bit. Just say, that's a little bright. I'm going to move it back a little bit. So there's another way of controlling light that's not just, with a pro photo $2,000 light that you can set it at any power you want, which is really nice. But if you don't have that, if you have just one of these, you can change the power of light by moving it. Okay. And what's the difference between like a pro photo studio light? Well, studio photographers use flash. They don't usually use what this is called. This is called a continuous light, for what that's worth. Okay. It just means it's on all the time. Continuous light. It's going to be on when you take the photo. Okay. So, one of the things too is a lot of photographers will go out and buy, and I have a guy in my first class that has one, those little LED lights. I don't have one. They're really, I've used them in the past. They don't tend to last very long unless you get a really nice one, but they're video lights and they're like a rectangle and they put out LED, a lot of power. And they're kind of nice because they're continuous light and you can actually see what the light, that's the nice thing about continuous light, is you can always see what it's doing. I can see what it's doing wherever I move it, I can see. And that's nice. And you can get an LED light that will just go on your hot shoe of your camera and it'll always be on when you want it to be, and you can light things that way. The problem with that is it's always going to be frontal, right? It's generally used as a fill light, okay? And that brings me to, when I say fill light, what do I mean by that? Filling in shadows. I already kind of explained that. In a studio, you usually are not just using one light. You'll have a main light, which is your most powerful light, and it'll be at like 45-degree angle from the front. Then you'll have like a fill light that'll be over here, that'll just kind of less powerful, like maybe half the power of your main light, but filling in the shadows from the other side, okay? And then you might even have like a backlight, like something back here behind me that you can't see, but it's shining up and kind of creating a glow behind the subject, but it'd be really low power too. Trust me, real low power on the backlight, but it would just create a little bit of glow in the background. There's a lot you can do with lighting. But you can also do a lot with outdoors too, but with reflectors and flash and stuff like that. Okay. So what are we doing in this project? It's very simple. Like I said, it's 4 photos. It's 4 photos. And all you're going to be doing is left side, right side. Okay. And what I want to show you right now is the album Portrait Lighting. Okay. And we're going to go there and I'm going to show you what I have from the book. And it's on, let me go to my albums. This is in the book too. Portrait lighting right here. Okay. So we got some examples. We'll talk about those, but we're doing this, which is side lighting. But the only problem is this photo is kind of not the greatest. That light is at her level of her head. Okay, just remember that. It's not way above her head like it looks like in this photo. It's at the level of her head, and I'll show you that. Okay, but this is side lighting. Okay, this is high 45, where now that's actually correct. The light is higher above her head and it's at a 45-degree angle. And the main thing on high 45, what we're looking for is this triangle. You see this triangle on her cheek. It's also called Rembrandt lighting. They call it high 45 in the book, and that's kind of what I call it too, but it's also called Rembrandt lighting. Rembrandt was a painter. I'm sure you're all well aware of that. That used to do this with window light. He would get like a young girl maybe kneading bread or something, and like have a window light just coming in perfectly on her face here, and at a 45-degree angle have this nice triangle. Rembrandt did this in his portraits all the time. So that's all we're going to do is side lighting and high 45 Rembrandt lighting. It's in the album there, and I'm just going to show you too. So how does that equate to 4? Well, what I want you to do is do both of those on each side of your subject. And you're going to need a person to sit for you for this. So again, if you have time, you can come into the classroom at 2 o'clock on Thursday. I'll be there and you can do it in there, and I'll even model for you. I don't care. But there'll be somebody in there that can model for you. If not, if you're going to do it at home, just have your mom or dad or husband or wife or whoever come over and sit for you for maybe 10 minutes is all it's going to take. Don't rush it, but it really shouldn't take that long. So let me show you how to set this up. Now, if you don't have a clamp light like I do, it's going to be a little more challenging, but you can use like a lamp. You can get a table, get a little movable table that you can set the lamp on. All right. So now the first things first in this project, in this assignment is this. Don't have your subject like this, okay? Like looking at you like this, or like leaning, or like this. Have your subject sit perfectly still, straight up, looking forward. And I know that's not a good portrait pose. I know it's not, but we don't care about that. What we want is the lighting to look right for this particular project. So you want your subject, first of all, to sit very, very facing you. And I'm trying to get my head to like right there, right in the center. Okay. You don't want the head turned like this. You don't want the head turned like this or like that or any of that kind of stuff, right? You want it like right like that. Okay. That's the first thing. Set your subject straight ahead. And then what you're going to do, I'm going to turn my light off in here. What you're going to do, and I have this monitor light over here, which is kind of light pollution. I'm going to shut this computer down. I'm just going to go shut down so I don't have this computer on. And then I'm going to be in total darkness, which you should, and I might lose focus here. My phone should grab. Yeah. So let that shut down. And I think this light would overpower it anyway. But in total darkness, you're gonna be here, and you're just gonna go side light, okay? And you can move it a little bit, but what you want is right at head level, out of the frame. You can move it back, right? Out of the frame, and one side of my head is lit, and the other side is in shadow. Okay, and it looked a lot more exaggerated in the photo lab than it does here, but you can see it here. That is side lighting from the right. That's it. And then take the photo. Now here's another challenge. How your camera is going to have a hard time focusing in low light. Okay, it just does. The light meter or the camera focus has a hard time focusing in low light. So focus on the bright eye. Focus on the bright eye. Okay, and that's, or the bright area of the face, at the very least, the bright area of the face. Okay, but the bright eye for sure. Okay. All right, so that's side lighting from the right. Then all you're going to do, I mean, it's really simple. It almost becomes just an exercise in following directions, right? But you're just going to come over to this side and you're going to do the same thing. Side lighting from the left. Okay, that's it. Side left, side right, side left. Boom, boom. Okay. Now, a lot of students, I don't know why, but they only do one side. Make sure you do both sides, okay? And that sounds silly and repetitious, but it's just about moving the light and looking at it twice. That's really all it is, okay? The next one is the same thing as far as left side, right side, but now high 45. Now, hopefully we all know what a 45-degree angle is. It's just you want to go 45 degrees out from your subject. And I'm going to take my glasses off for this, and I might be able to get it. It gets a little bit challenging. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hold this light up and I'm going to get it higher than me, okay? And this is going to be a little hard for me to do here, but I'm going to get it higher than me and at a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to shine it on me until I start to see, there it is. Yeah, I'm going to do it again. So I'm going to move it a little bit more in front of me, and there it is, even if it's like that. Now, if you look and you see that right there, that triangle, okay, and I know this looks kind of creepy the way this is, my eyes look weird, but that's all I'm looking for. If you move the light too much, you lose it, okay? All right, and I don't know, hopefully my camera's still working here, but you move the light just the right amount and you get that nice little, there it is, that nice little triangle there. You see that? I'm sure you all see that right there, right? That's what we're doing, high 45, right? This is on my right side. And then I'm just going to move it over here and I'm going to do it again. High 45. Now the camera's backwards on me, but I'm going to go high. There it is. High 45 left. Boom. See that triangle? That's what I'm looking for. If I don't see that, it's not good. I want to be able to see that. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Like if you look at it right now, I can bend the light a little bit. You know, it gets, even that's okay. You know, anywhere in there is okay. What's happening is the bridge of the nose is obviously creating, and the tip of my nose is creating that shadow, right? So, and that's why I say you can't have your subject like this, right? Or like this, or, I mean, in there, you kind of get it right there, right? But I want you to have the subject looking straight ahead, right? So that triangle is what I'm looking for. I mean, so basically, let me turn my light back on. The main things about this is, yeah, it's not a creative assignment, but you can be creative with it. The creativity in this assignment, what I want is a good clean background. Don't do it in a cluttered room. Try to find like a wall, you know, maybe hang a curtain or a sheet or something. Just have a nice background. It doesn't mean it has to be just a one color wall, but just find something where the background kind of works with your subject a little bit and it's not all cluttered like this is. And also try to keep the light out of it. And all you have to do with that is just zoom in a little bit and make sure, you know, all you have to do is take a photo of a person from about here up, from about the chest up. You know, it doesn't have to be wide. You should be tight on your subject. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that? It's, you know, it's not rocket science by any means. I mean, people have struggled with it. It really helps to have a decent light source. Okay. That is going to help you a lot. If you try with a flashlight, light is like water in some sense. Okay. And again, that's just me. That's not something I've read, but meaning that it can be shaped. Okay. If you run water through a pipe, it's going to stay pipe shaped as it goes through the pipe. Light is kind of the same way. Like if you shine a light through a pipe, it'll come out the other end kind of, it'll start to spread as soon as it gets out of the end, but it sort of will be spotty. Like if you see, how they make spotlights on stage for a play. You know, think about a play that you've ever been to. If they have a spotlight, they've actually, what they have is a light, and then they have this big sort of cone coming out of the light to kind of keep that light spotty. That's how they do it, right? So light can be shaped. The reason I'm saying that is if you use like a flashlight, it's kind of like a spotlight, okay? And it might be like, it might not illuminate the entire face. Maybe it will, but you're better off getting a light like a bulb. And then, especially if you have something that has this, because this kind of shapes the light, but it's not really a spotlight. It kind of expands it, but it's not spotty. So it's nice to have one of these. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. You can still do it with just a lamp and a bulb on the end of it. Okay, it'll work. So the main thing is a lot of students struggle is they don't get enough light. It has to be bright enough. And the other thing is turn all the lights off in the room. I would, because you're really going to get a more dramatic effect. And when you're light metering, light meter for the light. That's what the light meter is going to do. It should tell you the right exposure. As long as you have the camera close enough to that light and you do a light meter read and get the camera kind of close to your subject's face and light meter read the face, it'll give you a good light meter reading. It'll tell you what you need. Okay. So, and it's probably going to be kind of high ISO and kind of a big aperture, and that's okay. So, you know, be creative with your background if you want. And also you can be creative with your subject if you want. You could dress them up like Abraham Lincoln, or, you know, you don't have to, but you could do something. But yeah, it's more of a technical assignment than it is a creative assignment. I'm really just looking for that split lighting, side lighting, and then I'm looking for that triangle on both sides of the face. So if you look at some of the student examples really quickly, we'll just go through. This was from my first class, and I really probably should update this, but these are still good. But here's split lighting, side lighting, and then they sort of turn the face a little bit, but it still works. It's still, and this is a good thing to do in portraiture. You can do this if you want. I just wouldn't really think of it as some kind of portraiture that you're going to say, but if you really want to, you can. Like if it's something you want to take a really cool portrait, yeah, go ahead. And, you know, you can put the hand up to the face like that. But what I'm looking for is that triangle, right? So this is a really well done example of it. Okay. And then this one is well done as well, but she has the subject sort of turned. And I think that can make it more challenging. Okay. And if you feel like you can do this, it's okay. This is still perfectly fine. This is side lighting. All right. When it got to this, and this still works too, and she just had her turn the other way. She's got side lighting. The reason I say don't do this, especially if you're not real comfortable with this, it'll be harder. Okay. But if you feel like you want to do this, you can. Okay. So I'm not saying don't do it, because this is done fine. All right. And then here's just more of a standard. It's kind of a yellow tungsten light, but that's it. And this, Austin always found a way to look kind of sinister in his photos. But you know, this is just like side lighting, right? And then there's that triangle, right? So that's your high 45. That's your Rembrandt lighting, high 45. And then here again, that's your Rembrandt high 45. And that's your side lighting. You just do it 2 from each side, one, you know, once on each side. And that's it. I mean, it's hopefully it's not boring. I mean, because there's little things that'll teach you along the way besides the lighting, is the focus and getting the exposure and those kind of things. Okay, so there's that. And really the main point of this is, and we're done after this, but the main point of this, and it really is that you're looking at light. And I know most of you probably already are, and that's great, but even that side lighting, as weird as it looks, side light is best light. Okay. And not maybe when it's stark and right down the middle of the face, but if you're talking about you're going out to dinner with your friends or whatever, and it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun's coming down, and you got a nice side light, and you go out to the front of the restaurant, and it just looks really beautiful, and you have like the restaurant in the background. You want to move your friends to the point to where the light's coming in from the side. Okay. You don't want it beating on the front of them. You don't want it behind them. You don't want it above them. You want it coming from the side. If it's coming directly from the side, that's still good. If it's coming kind of high from the side, that's even better. Okay. And there's also, when we're going to talk about this environmental lighting, the magic lighting is sort of behind the subject, but not directly, but sort of behind them at an angle. It's like reverse high 45. Okay. That's why we do this assignment, because this is high 45 from the front. When you can get the sun to do your high 45 from the back, when you learn that, you can make money at this all day. And I trust me on that. I mean that 100%. Once you figure that lighting out for the sun, you can put some photos up and people will start calling you for portraiture if that's something you want to do to make extra money on the weekend or whatever. I mean, it's there. So we'll talk about that in 2 weeks though. But again, that's just high 45. It's just behind the subject a little bit instead of in front of the subject. Okay. So anyway, does anybody have any questions about that? Like what that entails? It's just 4 photos, 1 album, portrait lighting, 4 photos, side right, side left, high 45 left, high 45 right. And that's it. Okay. I mean, and all of you are doing really well. Like I said, I do want to look into some photos at some point, some other stuff. At least what I'm going to try to do every week is bring up, something in a photo. But your I forgot who I talked about last week, but your shadow play and your creative motions were really good. Let's just go. I think Jillian, I think I talked about Jillian, but let's go with Samantha had, I'm not sure if Samantha had them. Let's go with Allie's well we're talking about, we looked at Allie's creative motion. Let's go with Anne. Let's look at Anne real quick here. And I there's only so many of us in this class, so but with creative motion, she did a lot, and so did well, some of these with nature, right, which are nice. Like this was outdoors, and she used that really small aperture, which is, I said, good use of the small aperture here. And I like the way this is framed. This is a nice little outdoor photo. It's not knock my socks off or anything, but I do like the light in it, and I love the way this wind kind of blows this around a little bit, these little leaves here. It's nice. It's good motion. It's 0.3 of a second, like a third of a second, right? And it works really well. And then she varied it up a lot. She did some kind of like, almost looks like a reflection here. And she varied. Is that the only one you had of the dog? I thought you had a couple. You did, and you're working. But yeah, so she just had like a 2.5 seconds. So the reason this one's so distorted and so blurry is because of such a long shutter speed, but it's fine. It works. And to me, it doesn't really look as much like motion. That's where you kind of run into, does it just look like an out of focus photo, or does it look like motion? And that can be a problem sometimes. Are you really, but I still think she's experimenting. And what I do like about her little body of work here is that she changed her subject quite a bit. Now on this one, this is a 1 second shutter speed. Obviously the plant wasn't moving that much, but you do see these shadows move. Like this actually almost looks like a double exposure in some way, which is interesting. But again, and even here you see like a little bit of a blur. And then here, water running. And that's, again, like if you had this at a really long shutter speed, like a 1.5 seconds, it would just all be a blur here. So it's kind of good that she went back to a third of a second here for this, and her fingers are, sort of blurry. But yeah, that shows motion. It shows the motion of the water. And then here we get outside, and like I've said before, like swing sets and kids' playgrounds are always good subject matter. And here I found this one interesting because I thought that was a flash hitting that, because that's so bright there. And I said this is interesting because it looks like you had a flash, but it's just these chains really reflecting light, and just that little bit of motion. Sometimes the little bit of motion is kind of nice. And here she had 1/8 of a second, which I know it says 8 there, but I know this is 1/8 of a second. I can tell just by how fast it is. Sometimes the 1/8 of a second is nice in the 15th because it's not over exaggerating the motion. So that's good. And then this one looks like one of those zooms where you zoom, where she zoomed it, which I think it worked really well with this little streak of light and this chain here. So that was good. And that was looks like a 3-second exposure. So that was a long zoom, zoom in, zoom out. So, and then she went to lights, used lights. So there's a lot of variety here, which is really good. A lot of variety, a lot of different, and then this one's really kind of like you see this head here. Who is this, Anne? Is this a person?
Yeah, that's me.
Is it you? Wow. Yeah. Do you see what I mean, it just looks almost skeletal almost or something in some weird way, doesn't it? Or maybe that's just my dark side coming out. But it's interesting. I like the way that like the eye, there's a little bit of gleam from the eyes here, like the gleam from the eye. So I don't know. I find how that kind of accidentally turned out pretty interesting in some way. Distortion is yeah, it just was a little bit, yeah, strange, but it's good. It's good. And that's what you're gonna get with long shutter speeds a lot of time. And then here we just looks like what is this, Ann? Like a fire, like a match or
A
something?
flower on fire.
Oh, wow. Okay. You set a flower on fire. Okay. Interesting. Was it done at night?
Yeah, it was done at night.
Yeah. So yeah, good variations. And that's what I like to see. I like to see a lot of different scenes. And let's go. One more and we'll go through a little quicker, but let's go with, we'll just, because Jillian's right here, and then I'll write these down this time and we'll do some, Jillian's got her depth of field up too. Good. So Jillian did, like, she spun a globe with some kind of something around it. And I really like those. This one was interesting too. Just kind of really a faster shutter speed. Yeah. Well, half a second's not that fast, but the globe must have not been spinning very fast here. But you see those streaks in the globe and you see Australia there. I thought that was an interesting technique. And then she had, I'm guessing that's your daughter, or with cards, like flipping cards, which I thought was cool, and especially how it got with this one, which is these are cards here too, right, Jillian? Are those cards?
No, that's actually a ribbon that we found.
Oh, a ribbon. Okay, I thought maybe those were cards being thrown up in the air and it just got like that. So that's a ribbon. Okay, cool. So yeah, and then you just use like these like little throwing money in the air. So that's fun. And yeah, and I like again how she changed it up and she hung a background here and had like kind of an interesting movement of the body there, which is, with the head kind of flapping. It's almost like, I can't tell me what to do or something like that. It looks like, but like in creative motion. So very, very good. Very good. So yeah, and I can look at some of these and go, it looks like you're having fun with them. And shutter speed is the mechanism for exposure, right? You should pick your aperture because you need depth of field or not depth of field. And one thing before I let you go, I want to say this, and I thought of this when I talked to the first class. If you're ever at f22 on your camera, ask yourself why, okay? And I'm not saying there's never a reason to use f22, but I could probably count on one hand in the last 20 years me using f22, all right? And maybe that says something about me as a photographer, but it's because I'm a portrait photographer for one. But for two, there's really no reason for it unless you want depth of field from the first rock that you focus on all the way to the last tree a mile away in the distance. You really never need anything. And again, this isn't a rule, but you really never need anything higher than like maybe f8 or f11, sometimes f16. Now, if you have really bright sun and you have to tamp it down for a long shutter speed, yeah. But how often are we doing that out in the bright sun? So my point is, aperture bigger is generally always going to be better because you're giving yourself more light. You're letting in more light. Plus, you're getting that nice background, that soft background. And you could say maybe that's just a stylistic choice. It definitely is just a stylistic choice, but it usually looks better. And again, don't take that to the bank. You can shoot at f/22 for the rest of your life if you want. But the problem with f/22 that I see a lot of Photo One students is they don't even realize why they're using it, and they're just hurting themselves as far as how much light is coming into the camera. So like I've said before, like go 5.6 or f/4, start from there and use your shutter speed. It's just going to be better. But anyway, that's enough. I think I've covered that. Does anybody have any questions about the portrait lighting assignment at all? Does it seem pretty understandable? Okay, I've got everybody marked as here. I got Grady. Okay, so yeah, I got everybody marked as here. So that's it for the day. I'm going to go ahead and upload this to YouTube. If you have any questions, just email me. And again, I just want to make sure you know, if you come in Tuesday or Thursday at 2, you can use my little light and I'll be in there and I can help you with the portrait lighting assignment. And you can come in anytime on Thursdays at 2. I'm in there, even though that's the first class. Since you're online, we don't really have that. But if you want to, if you're in the building, you can come in there. It'd be good to meet you, and that's fine. We have like discussions and critiques. There's usually only like 5 or 6 people in there, but come on in if you want to. All right, so I'll see you all next Tuesday, and we will talk about backlighting next Tuesday and why it can be a good, useful tool sometimes. Okay, so that'll be next Tuesday. Yeah, have a good week. Oh, do we have, hey, good, thank you for saying break. Do we have spring break next week?
Yeah, I believe so.
Is it next week? I fail on this every time. So it is next week. So I won't see you next week. I will see you the week after next. So you've really got a lot of, none of you really need, but you've got quite a bit of time to catch up on things right now. So if you need to, all right. So use that time if you can. Yeah, it is next week, isn't it? Spring break. Thank you. See you later, Vanessa. Take care, everybody. I'll see you the week after next. Unless it's not spring break. She said, I think so. I'll look on the Sinclair calendar. I'll send out an email just to make sure. But if it's next week, it's next week. Then we won't be here. So, all right. All right. See ya. You good, Jillian?
I was just wondering if you could quickly look at my like depth of field to make sure that I did it
Yeah,
correctly.
absolutely. Yeah, I just saw that you had them up. Let's look at them. Are you a photo major, Jillian?
Yeah, I'm working on getting the certificate from Sinclair.
Good, good. Yeah. So when we were in film, did you take the film photo one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we are in film, it's almost easier in some way because the film cameras kind of dictate your aperture and shutter speed. But I realized in film class that a lot of people were doing it wrong. So with digital, since I can read all the numbers, I like it to be done, you know, almost exactly 100% correct, right? So
Yeah.
let's see here. Wow. Okay. So you really went. I'm trying. Your focal point is this wall here, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So here you're at f/16, and even at 16, you realize why she's still soft, right? Because
Yeah.
that's so close to you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you've really exaggerated. This is good. If it's exactly what I think it's going to be, this is going to be a great example. So you went from 16 at a 60th, which is perfect. You're right in that wheelhouse where you've still got a manageable shutter speed, right? And then you went, boom, wow. And you're still focused right here on this wall. And you went to 5.6 at a 500th. And now I'm going to look. I'm just because you did it right. I mean, I knew I had a good suspicion that you would do it right. You went from 16 at a 60th to 5.6. So you went 1, 2, 3 stops. So from a 60th, you went 1, 2, 3 stops to a 500. You did it 100% accurate, 100% exactly the way it's supposed to be done. So that's good.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure the second one is the same way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Focused on the steps, 16. Or there's your 5.6 at a 250th. So it's a little different now. but you're 5/6 at a 2/50th. You're focused on the steps. And then, yeah, you're at a 16th at a 30th. Oh, well, oh no, because you went to a 30th. Yep. So you did it exactly right. Yeah. Now, I know you want to go, but let me ask you this. Was that challenging at all for you, or did you pretty much nail it?
I think it was pretty easy. I think what was hard for me was the one on the steps. I was trying to get like a low angle, and so I didn't have my tripod, and so
Right.
like if I had to like hold my camera against the ground, and just like slightly shifting my hand to readjust my settings messed it up.
Gotcha. But yeah, you nailed it. Definitely.